Hello and welcome to this video on a common but misunderstood vitamin, vitamin C. Vitamin C is commonly found as a supplement in tablets that have more sugar than your average lolly. It is one of the things in oranges that are supposed to make them good for your health and immune system beyond what being a fruit would convey. It is also why scurvy is largely a thing of the past, but not without some very important historical impact on its way there. Unlike many other nutrients, vitamin C is essential. This means the human body cannot synthesize it from other material. It also means you must source it in its original form from something else like citrus and berries. This dependency on an outside source is very important when you consider where and how vitamin C is used in the human body and how easy or difficult it is to source. It has roles in enzymes, immunity, antioxidants, and so on. If you must source it from somewhere else, and it is used in some very important parts of your body, then a lack of vitamin C creates some very serious consequences. The most well recognized of these is scurvy, if only from Hollywood's depictions of it. Vitamin C as a name is something of a misnomer. It is not a vitamin, but a group of vitamins with similar functionality. These all fall under the chemical family of ascorbates, and this is where most vitamin C formats are found when sold commercially. The ascorbate acid and base forms are useful as they will readily change between these two as needed in response to the environment. The same thing is true of the role vitamin C has a cofactor in enzymes. Without the cofactor, in this case an enzyme, will not, or at best will have, severely hampered functionality. The aforementioned changing forms are useful as it allows vitamin C to be an antioxidant. It will catch any free oxygen, which is known as a radical oxygen species, and bind with it. This neutralizes the radical oxygen species and prevents damage. Oxygen in this form can be generated spontaneously, via chemical processes, or by pathogens which use it to gain entry to tissues and cells. This does not mean more vitamin C is good, as too many antioxidants can be bad for you, but fortunately, vitamin C is largely excreted in urine if you consume too much, so it has relatively few downsides to excess consumption. Too little vitamin C, on the other hand, is bad. It is, however, a somewhat slow process. It takes time for vitamin C deficiencies to show, as both the immune system and the enzymes that use vitamin C have to process the loss and then fall behind where they need to be in what is synthesized. This can take approximately 4 weeks, or it may vary depending on pre-existing levels of vitamin C and how lacking in vitamin C the diet is. The first sign of this is loss of collagen production, or at least maintenance of collagen. This leads to insufficient integrity of the collagen for it to perform its function. You'll note it around the skin, the eyes, and especially the mouth. The skin and dermis overall begin breaking down and not healing. The obvious examples are open wounds and tears in the skin that occur far more easily than they otherwise should. It can also cause bruising, internal hemorrhage, and gums that look wrong. As the condition continues on and becomes more extreme, it can cause the loss of teeth and bone deformities. The latter is especially true in young children who are still developing their bones. While early research into vitamin C was very primitive, there were observable results that led to the use of citrus fruit to treat scurvy. While it was not known exactly why fresh food, which contains citrus but also other things like cabbage, seemed to prevent scurvy, it did. And since it was known that this happened, it led to the incorporation of much fresh food into the diet of navies. The British particularly used limes. Every year, thousands of sailors would die due to scurvy. It hurt immunity, which made sailors more vulnerable to disease, and, along with all the other aforementioned effects, such as internal hemorrhage, most of the navies in the world suffered, and especially those of the great powers that fielded many ships. This was so bad that many navies would assume that up to half of their sailors would die from scurvy while at sea. In one extreme example, approximately 20,000 sailors and marines on one English expedition in the Caribbean, only 200 survived, with nearly all the others dying from scurvy and disease. That's a 1 in 10 return rate. At the time, we're talking roughly early 1700s, there was a lot of confusion over just what caused scurvy and what cured it. This led to one experiment which is described as the first proof of a cure to scurvy. Lind, who was a Scottish physician in 1748, took 12 sailors who all had similar degrees of illness, mostly theoretically scurvy, and divided them into 6 pairs. All 12 sailors ate the same general food and lived in the same quarters. Each pair received a different kind of supplement to their diet, a sort of treatment if you will. Each group got their own weird little mixture. One of them was given a quart of hard cider. Some was given vitriol, others vinegar. For some strange reason, seawater. Some were given oranges and lemons, and some were given a weird mixture of various different herbs and spices. They were all given this for 2 weeks, except for the citrus, because they ran out of citrus fruits. The citrus group had treatment for scurvy, but Lind attributed this to humours and not vitamins. Remembering this is the same period that they thought miasmas in the air caused illness, that bleeding people was a great idea, and that women had hysterical fits because they were women. Not exactly the most science-based of medicine. What we can conclude from this is that there was some idea, at least initially, that citrus would help, but it wasn't until 1795, approximately 50 years later, that another physician was able to convince the British Navy to start issuing lemon juice to its sailors. Downside to this was that they canned it. Canning was relatively new at this time, but it was largely effective. The problem is that canning, at least the process they used at that time, would destroy or alter the vitamin C in such a way that it wasn't much use. However, there was still at least some active ingredients, and the increase in other fresh ingredients that were preserved in cans meant that vitamin C was largely present. This became a regulation in 1795, and is one of the contributing factors as to why the British Navy could spread so widely and so quickly. This was further either reinforced or mitigated, depending on how you want to look at it, by the use of citrus in the longest voyages, where ships, particularly those parts of large empires, were often resupplied in the Far East or in the Caribbean and South America. From here they would receive some sort of citrus or something similarly high in vitamin C. This provided a certain amount of scurvy-deterring diet. Going forwards approximately 150 years, we get to 1928, where vitamin C is at least somewhat isolated. The chemical itself was isolated by a Hungarian biochemist, whose name we're not even going to try and pronounce. This was able to be isolated from both plant juices and animal tissues. They gave this the name hexuronic acid. Hexuronic acid was proven to be the same compound known as antiscorbutic factor. Antiscorbutic factor, or as we might now know it, ascorbic acid. That is when it gains its name. 1932, a British chemist, Walter Haworth, was able to not only figure out what hexuronic acid was, but give it a name and distill it down to a relatively pure form. This then led to its creation synthetically, and that is where most of our current vitamin C supplements come from, a synthetic pathway. In 1937, Nobel Prizes are issued to both the Hungarian biochemist and the British chemist. Today, vitamin C is closely associated with the common cold. It is touted as a kind of cure-all. We have previously addressed this. The short version of that video is that while vitamin C does help the immune system, it needs to be taken in higher doses months before infection. In many studies, there is a deficiency before the study in the participants, and the positive results could more accurately be accounted for by an adequate vitamin C intake during the study of those individuals where vitamin C is being supplemented so that they're now at normal levels. While vitamin C is a necessary vitamin, it is largely consumed in adequate quantities. Modern food security has largely mitigated the issue of scurvy. There are still limited cases, but in developed nations there are relatively very few, and you'll generally find them amongst those people who experience food insecurity or have difficulty accessing fresh food. We have come a long way from the sailors of yesteryear, and that is made clear with where and how it was needed, and developed into a steady supply. How many countries, especially those that were colonized in the earliest days of the empire's growth, would often have trees such as citrus trees growing in their properties. This is because they were hardy, provided ready sources of food and flavor. All this contributed to avoiding scurvy once people started growing their own. Thank you for watching this video. If you have found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions that you have below.